I used to believe that marriage was a promise of protection, a place where love made you feel safe, not scared. But the night my husband broke my leg, that illusion shattered along with the bone. It all started the night I walked into our favorite restaurant, the one we'd celebrated our anniversaries in. I had planned to surprise him with dinner after his long trip. What I didn't expect was to find her sitting in my seat, laughing like she owned the air I breathed. Her name was Melissa, my husband's assistant. I had heard the rumors, but I always brushed them aside. He'd tell me, "Baby, don't listen to gossip. You know you're the only woman I want." I believed him because I wanted to, because that's what a good wife was supposed to do, right? But that night when I saw her hand on his knee, when I saw his eyes dart to me in panic, something inside me snapped. I remember the sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor. Every step echoed my heartbeat, loud and angry. She turned to look at me, still smiling, still confident. "Oh, you must be the wife," she said, dripping with arrogance. My hand moved before my mind caught up. The slap echoed through the restaurant, sharp, final. Like the punctuation mark to every lie he'd told me, gasps filled the room. My husband stood up, face pale, eyes wide with a fury I'd never seen before. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he hissed, grabbing my wrist so tight I felt the bones grind. "Ask her," I spat back. "Ask your little assistant why her lipstick is on your collar." He didn't even deny it. That hurt more than anything. He just looked at me with this cold, hateful expression, the kind that made me realize I was no longer the woman he loved. We left the restaurant in silence. The drive home was suffocating, so I stared out the window, watching the lights blur into streaks, wondering how we got here. When we reached home, I got out of the car, shaking, trying to breathe. He followed, still boiling with rage. Inside the house, he slammed the door behind us. "You embarrassed me," he growled. "In front of everyone. I embarrassed you?" I screamed. "You cheated on me, Mark. You humiliated our marriage." I didn't see it coming. His hand, his shove, his voice breaking into a roar. I stumbled backward, tripping on the rug. Then came the crack. Loud, sickening and unforgettable. The pain shot through my leg like fire. I screamed. I think I screamed until my voice gave out. He stood there, chest heaving, eyes wide like he couldn't believe what he'd done. "Oh my God. Oh my God," he muttered, pacing. "You made me do this. Why can't you just stay quiet?" I crawled to the couch, clutching my leg. It was twisted wrong, horribly wrong. I could barely breathe. "Call an ambulance," I whispered. He hesitated. Actually hesitated. Then he grabbed his phone and left the room, muttering about how this was my fault. I lay there on the cold floor, surrounded by everything I thought was safe, the house we built together, the life I thought I wanted. And all I could think about was how quiet it was. No apologies, no remorse. Just the faint sound of him on the phone, not with 911, but with her. That's when something inside me changed. The pain faded into anger. The kind of anger that doesn't burn hot, it freezes. Cold, clear, dangerous. My father had always warned me, if a man ever raises a hand to you, call me. I'll handle it. I used to laugh at that. My father was a powerful man, the kind of man other men didn't cross. He wasn't just my dad. He was a force. And for the first time in my life, I understood exactly what he meant. When Mark finally called an ambulance, half an hour later, I didn't say a word to him. I didn't even look at him. But when the paramedics asked who they should contact next of kin, I said in a calm, steady voice, "Call my father." Because I knew, when my father answered that call, there would be no apologies. No explanations. No forgiveness. There would only be consequences. When I woke up in the hospital, the first thing I felt was pain. Not just the physical kind that crawls through your bones, but the kind that sits deep in your chest and refuses to leave. My leg was wrapped, elevated and heavy, but it was my heart that felt shattered beyond repair. I didn't remember everything clearly, just flashes. His face twisted in anger, the sound of my own scream, the world going black. When I opened my eyes to the sterile white walls, I wished I hadn't woken up at all. I wanted it to be a nightmare. But the bruise on my arm and the weight in my chest reminded me that it was real. The nurse told me my father was outside. She looked nervous when she said it, as if she already knew the storm that waited beyond that door. My father wasn't the kind of man who raised his voice, but when he was angry, you could feel it in the air like static before lightning. When he walked into the room, Everything inside me broke all over again. I wanted to be strong, to tell him I was fine, but when I saw the look in his eyes, that quiet, controlled rage, I couldn't hold back. I just cried. He didn't say much. He sat beside me, took my hand, and asked only one question in a low, steady voice that made the nurse freeze mid-step. Who did this? I couldn't bring myself to say his name. I didn't need to. My silence was enough. My father looked away, jaw tightening, and for the first time since I was a child, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Something cold, something final. He stood up without another word and walked out into the hallway. I heard my husband's voice outside, stuttering excuses, saying it was an accident, saying I slipped. But then I heard my father's voice, calm, controlled, terrifyingly calm. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. He just said, "You didn't make her fall. You threw her." Then there was silence, and after that I didn't hear my husband's voice again. That night the hospital was quiet, but I couldn't sleep. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. I reached for it and saw a message from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "We're on it." My chest tightened. I didn't need to ask who sent it. I knew it was my father's people, the kind of men who moved in silence and didn't make mistakes. They were the kind of men you called when justice needed no courtroom. I turned my face to the pillow, tears wetting the fabric. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't cry out of fear. I cried out of release. By the time morning came, everything had changed. The nurse walked in looking pale. She told me the police were here, that my husband hadn't been seen since last night. His car was still at the house, keys in the ignition, phone on the counter. The mistress's purse was found in the driveway. They said it looked like they both vanished into thin air. I just sat there staring at the wall, pretending to be shocked, pretending not to know what my father was capable of when someone hurt his blood. The officer asked me a few questions, but I kept my answers soft and simple. "No," I said. "I don't know where he went." When my father returned later that day, he didn't look angry. He looked peaceful. He brought me flowers, peeled an orange beside my bed and spoke like nothing had happened. But then, while handing me a slice, he said quietly, "I told you, sweetheart, no man lays a hand on my daughter," and walks away, breathing easy. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't have to. His tone told me everything. I looked at him, the man who raised me, the man who taught me to never show weakness, and for a moment I didn't know whether to feel grateful or terrified, because I knew this was only the beginning. My father didn't just want to make Mark pay. He wanted to make everyone who touched my pain disappear. And when he said, "Leave no survivors," he meant it in the most literal way possible. That night, as I lay there in the quiet of that hospital room, with the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears, I realized something had changed inside me too. I was no longer the broken wife lying helpless in a hospital bed. I was something else now. Something colder. Something stronger. That night felt endless, the kind of night where silence is heavy enough to crush you. I stared at the ceiling, counting every heartbeat, every breath that didn't feel like my own. The painkillers blurred the edges of my thoughts, but I could still feel the chill of what was happening outside those hospital walls. I knew my father, and I knew what he was capable of when someone crossed the line. The man I called Dad wasn't just a parent. He was a protector with power that stretched far beyond polite society. He had friends who didn't wear suits or badges. They didn't talk much, but they got things done. When I was a little girl, I used to think that meant he was a hero. Now, lying there with my leg shattered and my life broken open, I realized he was something much more complicated than that. By morning, whispers had started floating around the hospital. A nurse said the police were all over the city. Something about a missing couple. I didn't react, didn't blink, didn't let a single thought slip onto my face. I just sat there drinking water, pretending that I was still the same woman I was a week ago, the one who believed in love, in vows, in forgiveness. But that woman had died the moment my husband raised his hand against me. What was left of her was just watching, waiting. When my father came back that afternoon, he wasn't alone. 2 of his men followed behind him, quiet, composed, the kind of men who looked invisible until you really looked. My father's eyes softened when they met mine, but behind that softness I saw fire. He placed his coat over the chair and sat down like it was any ordinary visit. "You look better today," he said casually, though his eyes scanned every bruise on my skin. I nodded, even managed a weak smile, but I couldn't hold his gaze. The silence that followed said more than words ever could. Finally I whispered, "What did you do?" He didn't answer right away. He reached into his pocket, took out his handkerchief, and began cleaning his glasses like he always did when he was thinking. "I took care of it," he said quietly, as if those words explained everything. And in a way they did. He never needed to raise his voice or explain his actions. His calmness was the explanation. He leaned forward, his voice low. "You focus on healing. Let the rest be handled." That night, news broke on the television in the hospital lounge. A car had been found near the old river bridge, burned beyond recognition. The police believed it was an accident, but they hadn't found anyone inside. The nurses whispered, their faces pale, their voices low. I sat there staring at the TV screen, feeling my pulse slow down. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I just felt still. My husband's name came up on the screen. My stomach twisted, not out of grief, but from the strange calm that had taken root inside me. The mistress's name followed. I remembered her smug smile at that restaurant, the way she looked at me like I was the fool. Maybe she thought she'd won. Maybe she never realized she'd been sitting across from a woman who came from a family that doesn't lose battles. They end them. A few days later, after I was discharged, my father sent a car for me. He wanted me to recover at his estate, away from the press, away from questions. The drive there felt endless, trees blurring past, the world outside feeling like someone else's life. When we arrived, everything was too quiet. The house staff avoided my eyes, their smiles polite but distant. I could feel the tension humming in the walls, in the way people spoke only when necessary. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, my father joined me on the balcony. He handed me a cup of tea, steam curling in the air between us. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched out until it became unbearable. Finally, I broke it. "They're saying it was an accident," I said softly, "that no one knows what really happened." My father's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Let them say what they want. The truth isn't for everyone." I wanted to feel relief. I wanted to feel vindicated. But instead I felt hollow. The anger that once burned so bright had turned into something darker, something quieter. I had wanted justice, but what I got was vengeance wrapped in silence. My father had done what I asked, or maybe what I didn't have to ask. Either way, it was done. My husband and his mistress were gone, and the world would never know what really happened. That night I lay in my childhood room, staring at the ceiling again, just like I did in the hospital. But this time it wasn't pain keeping me awake. It was the knowledge that something inside me had changed forever. I wasn't the woman who got hurt anymore. I wasn't the wife who begged for answers. I was the daughter of a man who made sure no one ever touched me again. And for the first time, that realization didn't scare me. Thea comforted me. Weeks passed, but time didn't feel real anymore. It stretched and twisted, like every day was a blurred reflection of the one before it. My leg was healing slowly, wrapped in a cast that felt heavier than it should. My father's house had become both a sanctuary and a prison. It was safe, yes, but it was also quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that made your thoughts too loud. I'd sit by the window most nights, watching the trees sway, pretending that the world outside still made sense. People called, neighbors dropped off flowers. The police asked a few more questions, but everything faded into the same dull hum. Everyone wanted the story, but no one really wanted the truth. I started having dreams about the fire. I never saw faces, just smoke and the sound of metal groaning as it melted. In some dreams I was inside the car. In others I was standing far away watching it burn. I'd wake up with tears on my face, unsure if they were from guilt or relief. Maybe both. My father would check on me every morning, his tone steady, his eyes unreadable. He'd talk about small things. Breakfast, weather, business, but not about them. He never once said my husband's name again. It was like he had erased him from existence, not just from the world, but from memory itself. One afternoon, a detective came to speak with me again. He was polite, kind even, but his eyes were sharp. He asked the same questions, reworded, testing for cracks in my story. Where was I that night? Did I remember what time my father arrived at the hospital? Did my husband ever mention going somewhere? I kept my answers soft, steady, and simple. I was in the hospital, I said. I don't know anything else. It was the truth, at least the version of it I was allowed to keep. The detective nodded, thanked me, and left. I watched him drive away, feeling the air loosen around me just a little. Days turned into weeks, and soon my cast was removed. I could walk again, though every step felt different, like I was learning how to move through a world that no longer had a place for who I used to be. Sometimes I'd look at the mirror and barely recognize myself. The bruises had faded, but something in my eyes had hardened. My father noticed it too. One evening he stood beside me, his reflection beside mine, and said, "You have my eyes now." He didn't mean the color. He meant the way they see, clear, cold, final. A few months later, I went back to the house I used to share with my husband. The police had released it, calling the case inconclusive. The front door still creaked the same way. The air still smelled faintly like his cologne. I walked through every room, touching the walls, the furniture, the pieces of a life that once felt unshakable. In the bedroom, I found one of our wedding photos still hanging on the wall. I stared at it for a long time before finally taking it down. My hands didn't tremble. I didn't cry. I just felt nothing. That night I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered into the empty room, "You should have never touched me." The words came out steady, almost calm, but the silence that followed felt like an answer. Somewhere deep inside, I knew the universe had already balanced itself. There was no joy in it, no satisfaction, just an ending. When I finally moved back to the city months later, life started to rebuild itself in small, quiet ways. People talked less about what happened. Whispers faded. Time covered everything like dust. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I still see my father's face that night in the hospital. Calm, patient, determined. I still hear his voice when he said, "Leave no survivors." And though I've tried to tell myself that he meant it out of love, I know there's a darker truth buried beneath those words. He didn't do it because I was his daughter. He did it because he couldn't stand the thought of losing control. Now, when people ask if I've ever been in love, I smile and say once, but deep down, I know that love, real love, died that night in the living room with a single crack of bone. Everything after that was just survival. I carry the scar, not just on my leg, but in my soul. And every time I hear a man raise his voice at a woman, I still feel that same cold fire that burned through me the night I made that call to my father. I don't regret it. I can't. Because when the world shows you its cruelty, you learn to become something it can't break again. I may walk with a slight limp now, but I walk with my head high. And if anyone ever asks what really happened to my husband and his mistress, I just smile, look them dead in the eye and say, they got what they deserved.